It is 2 now. We should begin. I think people will just be more will possibly roll in as it goes. So let me just maybe turn on my video so people can just sort of see who I am for a little bit. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Preshnee.
Okay, I think we will officially begin. So hello, everyone. My name is Preshnee Singh, and I am the research coordinator for DRAP. For those of you who are unfamiliar, DRAP stands for the Durban Research Action Partnership, which is a collaboration between the University of KwaZulu-Natal and eThekwini Municipality to create action research focusing on biodiversity, climate, and people. I'd like to welcome you all to our very first webinar, which we plan to make into a series and host events quarterly. We have partnered with eThekwini's Municipal Institute of Learning, or MILE, for the series to reach out to other academic institutions to connect more widely on our topics. For our audience participants, we are hoping to create network opportunities to expose you to and showcase relevant research, as well as for us all to have stimulating discussions and to gain new ideas and perspectives. We want to make this a useful series for both researchers and municipal officials. So we are open to topics of interest for the series, so please feel free to contact me with ideas. Also, if you think that your research would benefit others in this type of engagement and would like to present it, I'll put my contact details in the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, please use it to introduce yourself with your name and institution so we can get to know each other. So the theme for today's webinar is river management in the city. It is a very big topic with many aspects, so we may need to do another session later on. But for today, we have 3 presentations with some question time after each. And then we also have a discussion session at the end, which I encourage you all to participate in. We want to hear your opinions about the research presented, as well as your thoughts and ideas on creating effective river management in the city. We have our 2 postdocs from the last DRAP Global Environmental Change phase, which ended last year. And the theme for that phase was Rivers from Source to Sea. Dr. Matthew Burnett will be speaking about fish ecology, and Dr. Refilwe Mofokeng will be speaking about microplastics. But our first speaker is Dr. Sean O'Donoghue from the municipality, who will be talking about the Transformative Riverine Management Program. So thank you all for taking the time on a Friday afternoon to be here, and I hope you gain something from this event. So over to you, Sean.
Thank you very much, Preshnee. I have put my camera on, but I don't see myself in the thing, so I'm not sure if it's come on or not, but that might be to your benefit if it hasn't. What's that?
I can see you.
Oh, okay. No benefit then. Yeah, greetings everyone, and it's really nice to speak to you today. It's been just over a month since terrible floods that we had on the 11th, 12th of April. So this presentation is going to build on the back of that, but really what I'm talking about is the Transformative River Management Program that we've been developing in the city of Durban over the last couple of years in partnership with the C40 Cities Finance Facility. So just the first thing I want to say about the flooding, there were 2 really major types of impacts that we saw from that rainfall. One is related to the geology of our our coastline and our areas into areas. And that's, the geology is very unstable. And with all the rain that we had in the 2 preceding days, all our ground waters were waterlogged. And then when that happens, it's quite natural to have these sort of landslips. And this one is on Ananda Mountain. The problem is that when these landslips come through houses, then there's a potential to cause lots of damage and obviously injuries and loss of life. But that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the other main impact, and that was in our rivers, that we saw a lot of damage coming from rivers. And in this slide, you'll see how the river comes flowing through here, and then it gets backed up in this culvert here. And this is a very, very common theme throughout the flooding in the city. And I'm going to focus in on another project that shows this quite clearly. So what happened when this river backed up, then the water topped over, which just damaged the road and went down through houses and joined up with the river again, because it's a big horseshoe lake, oxbow lake. And that's a very important point for the presentation today. So that blockage, you can see, and this is very, very typical of what happened in the floods, trees at the base of it, lots of vegetation. Typically, our waterways are infested with alien invasive plants, which have quite shallow root systems, so they wash out easily. Lots of solid waste, plastics and that, which further blocks it up. And then this flood was characterized by lots of silt coming down as well. And that very, very effectively blocks the river. And that's what caused the river to change course there. So the focus of my presentation, the flood part of it, is the Palmite catchment rehabilitation project. Obviously, it's in the Palmite catchment, flowing down out of Kloof through Pinetown, down past the University of Westville campus, University of KwaZulu-Natal Westville campus, and then down through the Quarry Road West informal settlement into the Mgeni. Now, we've had this project going for since 2014, I think it started, and it's really a shared governance approach where different sectors, stakeholders within the catchment, the city, the UKZN, you see Professor Kathy Sutherland in the top left there, civil society, Lee Deeth is in the picture, and the leaders from the Quarry Road West informal settlement, as well as residents of the catchment. So together we formed a community of innovation to try and understand what the problems are in the catchment and where the solutions lie, and to collectively be a solution for that. And that's been going for a while, but we managed to get some funding through the Infrastructure Investment Program of South Africa to start a program. One of the components of this program was the EnviroChamps. And these EnviroChamps have been doing really well. They've been doing some great work, reporting sewer leaks, reporting industrial pollution in the river, through duct clearing, lots of alien invasive vegetation in the catchment, visiting households to raise awareness around ecological infrastructure and the importance of water, fixing minor leaks while they're there, plumbing leaks. Lately, they've been doing a lot of clearing of illegal dump sites, so we're working really hard there, and all the time getting NQF training. So it's quite a nice model of implementation that we've seen in various permutations around the province, and collectively, this seems to be a very good idea, because it's putting jobs within the communities. These are really desperately needed jobs. People coming from the various informal settlements in the catchment doing this fine work. There's some more components to this. So this Palmite project actually started with Professor Kathy Sutherland doing research in the Quarry Road West Informal Settlement risk assessments for fire and flooding. That research has grown into an EPIC program. EPIC stands for Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities, where students are doing research. And in our EPIC project with the Quarry Road people, we developed a disaster response particular for informal settlements. Another key part of the Palmite project is this FUSE, this forecast early warning system. That's the city's formal system. We have a radar up on UKZN, I think it is on Howard College. So we get real-time rainfall data, and stream monitoring lets us link the rainfall with the stream flow, stream height. And then we can direct our response around the city. So that's a very formal system. And the way that formal system links into the Palmite is through a WhatsApp group, largely shepherded by Professor Kathy Sutherland and Smiso Bengo, who you'll see on the scroll now, a scientist. And they're the two core people that are working with the community to get the messaging from Fuse into the community. And on the night of this flooding, we had Jeff Tooley, who's a senior manager in catchment management, relaying this information from Fuse through the WhatsApp group to the community. And this is the community I'm talking about, Quarry Road West Informal Settlement. The river comes in from the bottom now. I'm going to show you a picture just now of this part of the river, these two bridges, and then it flows through there and then goes out under a bridge. We used to meet here quite a lot, but this got taken up by residents. And notice how many rows of houses there are here. There's a lot of people living here. So on the Monday, the 11th of April into Tuesday, we were monitoring through the Fuse system the rainfall and how high the river was. And when it got to what we know to be a dangerous level above 2 meters, that was when SMESO and then Professor Sutherland together started, they were in the community and putting up this danger tape. SMESO put up a bunch of danger tape to try and show everyone where the sort of the more dangerous areas were, and to get people out of their residence. I mean, you got shacks under the culverts, you know, where the river was flowing next to, so that was very dangerous for them. And typically in a storm like that, people shelter in place because that's their safest place to be. They don't have anywhere else to go. And then this happened. So about 5 o'clock in the evening, on Monday evening, this bridge here was still clear. It was still flowing all right, and the river, while high, was flowing through there, but it blocked up. Remember that story I told you about how everything blocks up? That's exactly what happened here. And then the river diverted course here, damaging this area, taking a lot of sand and stuff out, scouring out that little area I showed you just now, and then along here. So immediately you can see that change of river course causing a lot of trouble and people losing basically everything they had. That's that little area again. You can see suddenly we've lost about 3 or 4 rows of houses here all along there. We lost all that vegetation that was there and in between. So there were over 400 dwellings lost. There was only one person who died during the storm, and that was due to illegal electricity connection. So it wasn't even due to flooding. And if it wasn't for SMESO and Kathy getting people out that evening, people would have been sheltering in place. They would have, you know, some people would have evacuated, but I absolutely guarantee you there would have been a lot more people that would have been lost because people wouldn't have known that the river was going to change course here and this was going to happen. So we really see the value of the forecast system, but linking the forecast system to this community. And that's the lesson we need to take from this. How do we do this fine example of sort of bringing information to people and then helping them make the decision all over the city in all the vulnerable areas? And that's our challenge now, because we can see what a win we can get from it. There were still people that lost everything, you know, so it was not a complete win. It's just it's a bit of a battle that we won. And the big problem after the floods is people don't have land anymore. There's no land to build on. So there is quite a nice continuation to the story when Minister Barbara Creasy from the Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment came to visit us at the end of April. She interacted with the community members and heard our story. And then she said that she wanted to have trauma counselling in place, and UKZN have really stepped up to the plate, and the Maat Institute have started a trauma counselling program, which started on Tuesday. And the feedback from the community is that they were really thankful for that, and that it's going to be an ongoing process. So how you respond to these sort of events is absolutely critical as well. The rest of this presentation now is really, how do we avoid that happening? How do we avoid those culverts backing up and the damage that causes when they do back up? And so now I want to talk to you about the Transformative River Management Program that we've been developing in the city. And it's based on the Sihlanzi Mvelo program. And that's really just another iteration of the EnviroChamps that I was talking about earlier. It's another sort of model. And in this model, there's cooperatives of community members that manage 5-kilometer stretches of streams, and they do pretty much the same sort of stuff, you know, clear the rivers, make sure that the catchments or the banks are they're stabilized, the minor erosions repaired, vector control, that sort of stuff. And we did a cost benefit analysis with the city's finance facility to work out if, you know, if you look at in the future, and the future was sort of a few weeks ago, wasn't it? Let's be honest, it's the present. The amount of damage that these rainfall events cause, and even the smaller ones that we've had in the last few years, you know, if we can keep those bridges flowing, there will be much less damage because we won't see the rivers changing course and stuff like that. So with this cost benefit analysis that we've done, if we had to spend 7.5 billion rand in over 20 years, so that's not even that much money if you look at what money's worth these days, and that's in all 7,400 streams in the city, we would avoid 1.9 billion in damage to infrastructure. We know that infrastructure damage from this storm was over 25 billion. So first thing I'll say that this is only, the damage is only calculated on culverts. So it's not even looking at railways washing away, roads washing away, etc., etc., etc. So this is a massively conservative estimate that we've come up with here. And we didn't have all the data we needed. So we'd rather say, give the conservative numbers knowing that we could actually build on this estimate. And it was only done for the Ohlanga catchment. By doing this work, we can release between 12 to 24 billion rands worth in societal benefits, you know, ecosystem benefits, and there's a whole range of stuff, you know, that people can benefit, whether it's from sort of the river as a utility place or a space to grow crops or etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of it. I can share the report with you. We can create over 9,000 jobs. And that's really significant. You know, this is what gives this program such appeal, is that it can get political support. It has a lot of political capital, this project. Another interesting aspect of it, and the Durban Green Corridor are doing this already, is they're making paving stones and green concrete from this river waste that they're taking out, and they're doing some fine work. So if anyone's interested in that, looking up the Durban Green Corridor is a real feel-good experience. So you got an opportunity for the green economy here. And for every 1 rand we spend, depending on the land ownership class, we can release between 1.80 rand and 3.40 rand in societal benefits. So that's a significant sort of return on an investment. And our vision for the TRMP is to do all 7,400 kilometers of streams, getting them functioning so that we're getting ecosystem services from them. It's as you see, it's an adaptation to climate change. We calculated that the attribution to climate change of these storms is roughly around about 8%. That might be quite a big underestimate, but it is at least 8%. Some of you might have seen the study that came out where they did an attribution study about the storm that just happened, and they said that we could expect that sort of storm once every 40 years, but now with climate change, once every 20 years, you know, on average. So, you know, you can't take this as absolute numbers. So we can see climate change as having a real impact in our systems here on Durban. And we are busy developing a Green Climate Fund proposal, looking at attribution of climate change to support implementation of a TRMP around the city. There's a whole bunch of other great things about it. You know, it really is good for gender equality. These projects, we have a lot of women doing the work, and stewardship approaches, that sort of thing. The good thing is we can scale this up. This is being done after a learning exchange with Mombasa. They started a program. Same thing, Harare have now started a program after learning about this. Cape Town, Mbombela, Drakensberg, Stellenbosch, they're all starting their own transformative river management programs now. So it's something that can be easily replicated according to local context and scaled up. So it's a real good idea for Africa. As I said earlier, there's green economy benefits. Yeah, and it's invested in partnerships. So a lot of what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is talking about, the need for partnerships, being inclusive, everybody playing a role, you know, based on ecosystem services and nature-based solutions. We're seeing it in this project. So the last couple of minutes of this presentation, I'm just telling you now about how we're going to take this forward. Over the last year, we've been working with Shahid Solomon, bless his socks. He's been driving us hard to develop an implementation framework in the city. How is 7,400 kilometers of streams going to be managed by the city? Because that's a massive job. And as you see, it requires a lot of money. I was a bit flippant about the sort of the billions of money it would be required earlier, because we know that the city after COVID has so little money available to it. So this is going to take some very deft economic tap dancing around budgets and things like that. So first of all, we're going to increase this program incrementally. We can't just go whole hog 7,400. We're going to have to gradually get it bigger, and we'll start with trying to establish a small hub, maybe one professional and 2 support staff to drive the program on spending on municipal streams, and then start a process of developing an external non-profit company that can then start investing in land that the municipality doesn't own. As a municipality, we tend to only be able to invest on municipal owned land and also in traditional governance areas. So it's very much going to be partnership based and looking for funding from many different sources. It's not something the city would be able to fund on its own. So we are at the point now where we have this implementation framework, and we are going to present it to city leadership, and we're really hoping to get some dollars and funding. As I said earlier, we're putting in a funding application to the Green Climate Fund through the GIZ. Through the GIZ, they're going to help us develop a concept note if they like the idea that we send them. Where we are at the moment with this is my last slide now. So that first bullet point there, the technical support to develop this implementation framework, that's just been completed now. We're going to do a handover event at the end of June. So I would really like everyone, if you're interested in it, to come and support that handover event, where we're going to ask our city for money. That CICLEA acronym stands for Climate Change and Cities in Africa, Cities and Climate in Africa. And it's a program funded by the French Development Agency, AFD, and and they're giving us some support to develop for another 3 catchments in Durban the same cost-benefit analysis, so we can really deepen our understanding of what the costs are, what the attribution is, and that sort of stuff. And we're going to do that in the Palmite catchment, so that's really great. That's the project we're talking about. The Umhlangan and the Umhlatozan, which empties into the harbour. So that's quite an important one for PortNet. SILRIF, I'm not even going to try and remember what that stands for, but basically it's a pilot program that we're going to do in Durban. And we're looking at how we can use savings from future insurance payouts, because if we do TRMP well, we're not causing so much damage. And can we leverage the insurance industry to fund the TRMP now to save money later? That's essentially what that's happening. And we've really just started that piece of work. We've been accepted as a pilot city in that. We're looking for money and other opportunities. So Shahid, who I mentioned earlier, is going to try and establish a national platform for TRMP. So that would be really great, because I think it's we need it. And that bottom slide, those are other cities in Africa and South Africa that are doing their own TRMP. So it's a really good idea. And we hope that we can not only get it going fully in Durban, but in other African cities as well, that it really becomes one of the cornerstones of nature-based solutions on the continent. Thanks very much, Preshnee.
Thanks, Sean, for that. It's quite amazing every time you see the pictures of the flood damage and stuff. It's quite shocking to see the before and after. There was quite a lot of damage and things. Yeah, so we can open up for questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand, or you could type it out in the chat box and we can ask Sean to answer it for us. We've got about 10 minutes of question time before we move on to our next presenter.
Maybe I've got a question for Lungi Zuma, because one of the gaps here with TRMP is we can do this work, but of course, there are other impacts on the streams as well. And one of the massive problems from the floods was the loss of our reticulation, sanitation, reticulation, not just water path, but sanitation as well. I'm not sure if Lungi, if you can unmute yourself and answer a question, but so we've got the work we're doing, but Shade is also trying to set up a massive program around sanitation as well. And so we'd like to invite our colleagues from water and sanitation to be a part of that, because if we don't get the sanitation right, that undermines a lot of the work of the TRMP. And that gives you an idea of how you've really, there's many different tools in this toolbox that you've got to work to get the whole thing right.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Yeah, thanks, Sean, for that. Yes, I agree with what you said. The wastewater and any sewage spillages that we get going into the rivers causes, major environmental impact. As we've seen now with the flooding, we've had, our treatment works, not even looking at the treatment side, but just looking at how much the sewage they're receiving based on what they were receiving before. It has been a significant decrease over the last 4 weeks, and obviously all of that sewage is going into the environment, the rivers, the streams, the beach, etc. So you're right, sanitation is a major part of transforming our rivers and keeping them in a good condition. And I do think our colleagues at sanitation operations would be, part of this, and will do what they can to ensure that we don't cause the environmental damage that we've been sort of increasingly causing over the years. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Lungi. And maybe I could put you on spot and suggest that you do a presentation to this webinar in some stage in the future, because you do such fantastic sanitation work there that would be lovely for other people to hear it as well. Would you be up for that sometime?
We've actually had conversations with SMISO, and we're setting something up for later on. So I'm already on board.
Ah, lovely. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks. Refilwe?
Thanks, Sean, for a very interesting presentation. I think as I was listening, I was just, just drawing similarities between what our study found and what you are referring to. But I think my question to you would be, do you think there's any, sensitization in terms of, the community as to the extent of the problem or the cause of the problem with the floods and climate change and the implications thereof? Or do you think that there's still room for maybe education, or there's still room for maybe awareness with the public, so that there's some form of synergy that can take place?
Refilwe, I think there's massive room for awareness around the public in Durban generally, and particularly vulnerable communities in informal settlements, because they're not always able to access the various platforms that we get the information from. And maybe a lot of them are accessing social media groups that don't always have very accurate information and can be quite inaccurate. But a very interesting example here is the Quarry Road Western Formal Settlement, because we've been working them for a number of years now, and they're very, very on the ball with what's happening with the river, because they've been washed out a few times. You know, we've had 4 or 5 extreme rainfall events in the last 4 or 5 years where that have affected the community. So they're very dialed into what's happening. The difference with this one was the scale of what happened. It was just an order of magnitude bigger than anything we'd had before, and it was absolutely you know, they were so traumatized afterwards. When Minister Creasy came and we had that session, and Barclay was translating, you know, the minister was in tears. She was not flowing down her face, but she was crying because it was so moving, because these were just devastating stories. So I think the big difference was with this community is this was on a whole new level. But yes, definitely all around connecting these various vulnerable communities with the forecast early warning system real time is something the city needs to work on. That needs to be a part of our disaster response, because that saves lives. And that's the first thing we need to do, is save lives. Then we need to make lives more comfortable during an event, and then respond better after an event. I'm sorry, I can only just see a hand for number 23, plus 23. That's a number of participants, but I can't see who you are. Can you please ask a question, but identify yourself and ask a question?
Hi, Sean. It's Matt here. How are you? Good, so just question around the TRMP, and then having this big, you know, the work that you guys have done, and then having this big flood event. And the livelihoods or the lives that you saved is just phenomenal through that. But the secondary stuff that, you know, the TRMPs really aim to try achieve it on top of the saving lives. Did you find any gaps that are possibly needed and need to be tackled in order to improve the TRMP based from this flood event?
What do you mean by secondary stuff? I don't understand that.
Well, not secondary to saving lives. So like improving culverts, cleaning up plastic, alien vegetation plants, all that other stuff that improves the ecosystem services provided by the rivers.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand, but I think I'll have a go at it. Yeah, and to be honest, the forecast early warning system is not really a part of TRMP. It's part of the Palmite catchment project, but it gives us a tool to measure, you know, how effective TRMP is. So, you know, in terms of you know, what's happening in the river, if we're looking at what the flows were and how much rainfall there was, and if we look upstream, Jeff's got some quite good pictures of this, where the EnviroChamps had been clearing, duct had been clearing, and the EnviroChamps were working. There seems to have been less damage in culverts there. I've only got one slide, which is obviously not evidence, but just anecdotal at best. But we're certainly doing a study in other Sihlanzi managed areas in the city, because we currently do 500 kilometers in Sihlanzi areas. And the first sort of dip into that by getting the cooperatives who take pictures is that while there was damage in these areas, it was damage associated with infrastructure that was inappropriately built, and it wasn't really culverts blocking up. So the first look at that data shows that this effort has been pretty successful in reducing damage in culverts, and we certainly saw that a little bit higher up in the Palmite catchment, although obviously the Palmite has had limited work in it, and it needs a whole catchment to be done. I'm not sure if that really answers your question, Matthew.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was really interested in. You know, do we need to intensify efforts where we already are because it has worked, and you know, where was it failing? What additional stuff we can do? And I think it kind of ties into you know, us with fish movement and migrations and stuff. We look at these culverts as hindrances to fish migration. And if we can improve those culverts, could we look at improving them for fish movement as well as you know, clearing out debris and plastics and all of that. So that's yeah, that's helps answer the question. Thanks.
Well, and it also shows the importance of looking at a problem from many different angles. So yes, you can fix a culvert, but can you put a fish ladder in at the same time to enable migration of fishes and stuff like that? And so you can get many wins with one job that you're doing, because it doesn't add a hell of a lot to the cost of a job to make a modification for other aspects like fish migration and stuff like that. So that's an excellent point. We've got this opportunity. A lot of our infrastructure is damaged. Let's try and build it back in a way that takes into account many different needs, not just from our own particular need. And TRMP does that in a sense that it uses many different line functions input for the program. So it does the job of 8 different line functions, but maybe it could be more. Maybe we're missing the fish migration story and some other stories. So yeah, you're absolutely spot on. We need to be widening our minds about what solutions are required and not just tunnel visioning ourselves. Thanks, man. I think I've used up all my time now, Preshnee.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. No, that was excellent. And Matt, I suppose that's a nice segue into your take over, and yeah, and you can do your presentation on urban fish.
Thanks, Preshnee. Let me just give me a moment to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can.
I just lose the whole Teams thing with presenting, so I'm going to give it a go. Just shout if there's anything that's not cropping up. So okay. Yeah, welcome. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to present some of the work we've been doing through the DRAP program and just in fish in general. And I've titled it my presentation today, Urban Fish, primarily because we forget about the fish because we don't see them walking down the roads in a transformed environment. But the rivers that run through urban environments, like Sean was saying, have been transformed quite a bit by the practices and urban kind of infrastructure that's been built around these rivers. So yeah, urban fish in general are struggling a little bit in terms of water quality changes, as well as environmental flows and a whole plethora of issues that are affecting the fish. So just the presentation today, I'm going to touch on about 4 aspects that I worked on during my postdoc, and some of them we're still working on. And the first one is a fish kill happened up at Willowton, and that wiped out quite a huge population of fish. And then also the river ecostatus monitoring program that we were tasked to do, and then also just something on barrier tracking that affects migratory fish species, and then also the fish track program that we developed. So just quickly, the Willowton fish kill that happened in August 13th, 2019. It was probably one of the worst fish kills in recent history back then. I think there's been some more recent ones that now top it, sadly. But there's about 16,000 tons of crude oil that was spilled into the river. It affected 82 kilometers length of river, and that impacted Inanda Dam. Of that, about 15 tons of fish were removed in cleanup operations, and estimate of about 20 tons in total of fish was removed from the system through the fish kill. This estimates to about 51,000 fish, or about 750 fish per kilometer. There was very often the guys that really get impacted are the fishermen, and also the people that are dependent on the rivers and alongside the rivers, with one loss of life reported to occur because of the flood release after the event. Someone was collecting the fish out the river, and then the flood event, the water management release came through, and the herds buoy was not able to get out in time. And then also unverified reports of cattle dying. What's really interesting here is that if you take the value of the fish that were killed in this fish kill event, it equates to about 1 million rand, and that is at 50 kilograms, 50 rand per kilogram, which is pretty much below market value at the moment. Okay, this is just a depiction of the. This is just the depiction of the river and where the spill happened and the extent of the spill that went down all the way to Inanda Dam. And you can see it is quite excessive. We also did some pre and post sampling. Luckily, we were doing a lot of work in the river before the event happened. And we then went in after the event too, to kind of assess what the impact to fishes were from the fish kill. This is just a results page of that. You can see the two lines over here. This is the 2020 results, and this is the 2016-2018 results. The abundance of species as well as the diversity of species, and each triangle is a species. And you can see they're clustered on the 2017-2018 surveys that we did, with pretty good abundances and diversity found within the rivers. And then the 22 event, after the fish kill, there was very low abundances, and then already starting to be dominated by invasive fish. So there's no doubt that these big fish kill events have detrimental effect and impact on our rivers, and for the extent of the river itself is quite concerning. But with that, the river health program, we've noticed that there's been a slightly decline in our rivers across the quality of our rivers across the whole of KZN. This is the river ecosystem monitoring program that we did and tasked with for the years 2015 to 2016 here, and then I'll present results more specific to the Mgeni for 2017. And you can see this red circle is where the Mgeni catchment is, and you can see there's a fair to poor ecological status within the Mgeni system, and so it's not doing very well itself. And this was not only because of anthropogenic stresses, but also because during that period, you'll remember we were going through quite a severe drought. But less water in the system means less fish generally. This is just a couple of sites. We expanded the river health program in 2017 to get more representative of the Mgeni catchment, just to see what the fish communities were doing. And these are the sample sites that we used, and then you can see here, these are the trends that we got from doing the ecological scores over time. So from summer 2015 through to spring of 2017. And for the most part, the trends all seem to decrease, even though we had the drought lifted during the 2016-17 period. To say that we still find pretty good diversity of fish in our rivers, with some exceptions, and this is just a page that highlights some of those. And each fish has different ecological requirements that are that need to be met in order to keep to survive within the system. So you can see the eel here, for example, is a catadromous species that migrates from the Mascarene Trench off Madagascar into our rivers and lives in our rivers until it needs to move back to go and breed and start its life cycle again. So huge migratory fish species. And then you've got some less migratory fish species, things like the tilapia that don't require huge stretches of river to migrate to survive. But all these fish are facing some form of stress in our systems. The ones I've circled here are the ones that are of keen interest, because the one on the right here is the gurney red-tailed barb is now vulnerable. The Amphilis natalensis, which is the Natal rock catlet, has recently been split into 3 species. One now is unique to the Tugela and Mgeni catchment. And this fish that should occur in our rivers, actually now the only place we really seem to find them is within the downstream of Albert Falls, which is that biosphere. And then the broad striped barb, this is its breeding colors that are pretty prolific and actually found in quite high abundances across the region, but they are very sensitive to water quality changes. And then invasive and alien invasive fish species like the bass, and these, apart from all the multiple stresses that they face from anthropogenic activities, alien invasive species can be as detrimental to the population abundances and diversity of fish within the catchment. And we're finding more and more largemouth bass wherever we sample within the catchment, and that's concerning. So we started a little project last year called Finding the Red-tailed Barb, and this is the red-tailed barb here, and it's actually got quite a good stronghold in the Mweni stream, but in Maritzburg, where the fish kill happened, we haven't been able to find it yet. And this year we're starting to sample for it, and we still haven't come across it. But what we did initially was to map, excuse me, to try and map where all the in-stream barriers were that would further hinder the movement of fish within the system. So one question we're looking at with the fish kill is that we've destroyed the abundances of fish from 82 kilometers of river. Where can the fish repopulate from, and do they have access to that? And that's a big question, and that's what highlights the importance of allowing fish to move within the system and creating assisting that ability for them to do so. So we did a little project where we went, had an honors project come through, and Nwazi Nobo was actually on that, and she went and mapped a lot of the rivers using the Ambia Barrier Tracker, which is a citizen science app, which I encourage guys to use because it can help us map where all these small culverts are that could potentially be hindering the movements of fish. We chose four streams in Pietermaritzburg, and this particular one is what we categorized those in-stream barriers, whether they needed a fishway or not, and whether they could actually even be moved. Some causeways are no longer in use, and it would be simple enough to remove them to restore river connectivity and river health in general. So we categorize those, and you can see some of them we don't know. We don't actually have the data available to us to know whether fish excuse me, can actually move up over some of the in-stream barriers that we've put within the system. And then there are some that we actually don't need to do anything because there is a partial fish ladder on them already. So this was an interesting part of the study that came out of it. And this comes through using the barrier tracking app, that we can assess this data like this. Then we had a student called Lewin Africa. She looked at the lower Mgeni catchments closer to home for those in eThekwini, and she was looking particularly at the eel movement, escapement back out into the sea. and to see whether barriers had an effect of that. And the concerning thing that came out of her study is that she only caught one eel out of surveying for eels for four times in the year, and using she had over 7 sites. So it is concerning that we're not actually detecting some of these migratory fish species when we should be. This is just some of her results there, in that over 525 fish were caught throughout her study, and only 17 species out of the potential 38 species within the Lower Mgeni catchment were found. Excuse me. So the drivers that we could link to her study were a lot of the fish required different velocity depth profiles and pH, and also habitat available. Habitat being a composition of in-stream vegetation, marginal vegetation, and then the type of substrate present there, whether it's sand, cobble, or mud. This is just a long list on the left of what we caught, and the migratory requirements of each of those fish, and then the IUCN status. And then I just want to draw attention again to the orange fin barb, because what we found here, interesting enough, on the Shannon diversity index between the Mulweni, the Palmite, and the main stem of the Mgeni River, was that the Mulweni had quite a low diversity count, but it was the only place we actually caught the orange fin barb. And whereas the Palmite had a better diversity, and then the Mgeni still had the highest diversity across the study area. And I think what it highlights is that it's important to have connectivity between these streams and the main stem to maintain environmental integrity across the catchment. What she also did was on the Tugela River. I just want to throw this in here because eels should be recruiting back into the system, and it's very difficult to look for that, and we haven't found it, even though we used glass eel nets in the UN study in the Lower Mgeni, was that the eel recruitment was very poor in the Tugela system. And you can see in her study, she only caught 18 glass eels recruiting back into the system, and primarily it was only during her morning sampling sites. Okay. And then it just highlights that these species, there's a lot of other multiple stresses at play that are impacting the angulates, the 4 African freshwater eels that we have. And if we're not getting the recruitment right, we can risk losing the species to our rivers. The fish track is something that I helped co-develop for my postdoc, PhD, and then I carried on working on it for my postdoc with DRAP. And this is links back to kind of real-time remote monitoring work, and where we can place probes in the river, and then also attach probes to fish that all link back and read through a real-time DMS system that will then alert managers to the condition of the river, as well as the behavior of the fish, to say, okay, well, the fish aren't behaving properly, what's wrong with the system, and we can then go and investigate further. And this is just an example of a case study we used on the fish track program. This is a discharge profile over time. Point B on this graph is the left, sorry, the center habitat assessment using at that level of flow. And what with the water quality sense that we have with the fish track program is we can relate and monitor the in real time the flows of the river coming down, as well as with correct additional tools we can get the habitat associated with that depth profile within the river, and through that we can then determine what is going to change at different levels. So the right here you can see is an extremely high level in the river. On this where my highlighter is a very extremely low level, and then these are fairly normal flows. And this also helps us then map what habitats available to fish within the system. We tagged a couple of fish in the upper Mgeni system, and here we found out that movement of fish is primarily cued by temperature, but they need access to habitat, and that's provided to them by flows. And that was also a very interesting finding, because if you don't provide, or at least within light of climate change, we might be playing around with their cues to actually move and to spawn, which also could reduce the resilience of the species. Then we did a behavioral response following a flow release and gaining released water out of Howick Falls, and we could then monitor the response of fish in real time. And this is an example of that from one fish, and you can see the red line here is the temperature, the blue line is the discharge, and you can see this peak flow here, and then the green line is the activity of the fish as it responds to this. The dotted line is the actual time of release from Midmar. The blue, you can see when it reaches our site where the fish were tagged was delayed slightly, but you can see how this initial change in the flows actually what caused an increase in activity by the fish before the fish returned back to normal behavior. And from this we could conclude that if the flows are too excessive, it actually causes a disturbance in the system. But what is important is to maintain higher flows over longer periods of time that provide more habitat for fish. And then there's also ways we can link this up to alert system and actually alert managers as to when there's any of these changes within the system, and they can get an SMS via their cell phone. And just some management considerations through some of the work that we've been doing is that we need to consider ecological connectivity at different levels within our rivers, primarily for the movement of fish and to increase resilience of our fish species. But that also directly relates back to fish, people that are directly dependent on fish for food. Very often it's the people that are the poorest that are the ones actually fishing out the river and taking fish home to supplement their diet with protein. And if we can improve ecological connectivity, we can then also improve the availability of fish for these people. And then the impact of water management. So particularly with the eels, there's a risk if we can't maintain ecological connectivity because of water management requirements. There is a risk that the population of some of these fishes will collapse completely, and even potentially local extinctions. And then also we know this is what we do inland matters offshore. So how we manage our water resources is going to impact these catchment species like eels coming in and out. And then we do need further research on urban aquatic ecosystems. Mentioned earlier about in-stream barriers. You know, how can we fit these culverts with adequate fish passes that don't excuse me, that don't affect the flow of water through the culverts, but still provide a means in which fish can move up through. And there's a lot of innovative ideas out there. We just need to put it on the radar so that we can think about them and implement them. And then through the fish track, to use technology to help aid our rivers and better manage them so that we can save not only the fish but also human lives. So that's my talk pretty much quickly, and just would like to thank you guys for your time.
Thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, as you said in the beginning, I mean, because we don't see, or most people wouldn't see fish on a daily basis, you tend not to think about them, when it comes to these sorts of things. Does anybody have? We have about 5 minutes for some questions for Matt's presentation. Sean.
Thanks, Preshnee. I think about fish every day because that's the kind of person I am. But and it's very clear from these two talks, and when we hear Refilwe as well, because she's equally a part of this, how important this connectivity is, not just spatially, but also across the different functions that work on rivers, being connected with each other to the benefit of many different communities, the environment, etc., etc. But Matthew, my question to you is, you know, we've seen in the last 10, 15 years an explosion of tools, devices to enable us to do these amazing measurements that you were reporting now. So the tools available to ecologists have just gone through the roof. And of course, the power of the social network and being able to do social science has added to it. Would you like to just comment on how that has benefited your science, and then also how you can use this science to convince us old fogies and government to put fish causeways and things in? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think with citizen science, like the Barrier Tracker app, which is really helpful for us, is I think it just provides a tool to say that we know something more than what, and we can't just say no, we don't know how many barriers there are and all of that, and also just highlights what is a barrier, because a lot of people quite easily and rightly so, you know, will look, well, the water is flowing underneath the bridge, it's not a barrier, but you look at the culverts, changes the whole velocity depth profile of the river, that some fish aren't actually able to cope with and actually can't move up through those culverts. So in some ways, the apps have actually created some awareness that, yeah, there's more barriers than what we initially thought, and we need to look at them. I think changing mindsets and human behaviors, I'm still trying to get that right, whether it's you old fogies or even the younger generation. But I think the knowledge or the information is there. I think it's really about trying to take that and see how we can implement it. Like I say, there's a lot of innovative ideas to fix up culverts and stuff, but we need to try and use those ideas and see and put them to the test and implement them. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Matt. Refilwe, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Preshnee, and thanks, Matthew, for an interesting talk, even when you are not 100%, and you still push through. I think my question to you would be, I know you attribute a lot of the extinction and lack of biodiversity on flow and on barriers, but then what role does climate change play? Do you think there's a significant role that climate change can be also attributed to? Yeah.
Yeah. So climate change is attributed to it. I think, like Sean alluded to, it's not when these extreme events happen, but it's happening now. The present is here, and I think I've always said, with fish kill events like the Willowton one, is we are predicting that those events will potentially happen more frequently because there's more industry in the catchment than there used to be, and therefore there's a high risk of a fish kill event happening again. And so the anthropogenic stresses are probably putting the system at risk far more rapidly or at a greater rate than climate change is at the moment. But climate change is also one of the reasons why some of those conditions are happening and affecting the impact of the fish. So I think does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.
Thanks for
I
that.
think sorry, Preshnee.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
What I wanted to add there is that although I've highlighted some of like the river connectivity and that as a primary goal is that water quality is still very much an important element to consider that's negatively impacting fish species. So yeah, water quality through these events like the fish kill, all these multiple stresses eventually can cause populations to crash. Thanks.
Yeah. No, good point. Most definitely. I mean, it doesn't, with these things just happening one after another, it doesn't really give them time to recover, yeah, which can really impact them. So I see there's a few questions in the chat, and Patrick has picked up on some, and I think we can maybe take those into the discussion session. So thanks for those. So if you do have any questions or comments or anything, just pop it into the chat box, and then we can maybe pick it up during the discussion session. So yeah, we will go to our next presenter, which is Refilwe, who'll be giving a presentation on microplastics. And then, yeah, and then we can have a little question time there for that talk, and then we will go into our discussion time. So Refilwe, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Preshnee. I think just a slight adjustment there. I think for the purpose of today's discussion, I just decided to have a look at plastics in general and not necessarily just microplastics. Yeah, so I think I'll just be focusing on more than just microplastics. So if I can just share my screen. One of the outcomes of yeah, I think I wanted to share the a video of one of the part of the documentary that was one of the outcomes of the study, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to get it to play. But if not, we can just carry on with the presentation. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah?
No, nothing, Refilwe. So.
Nothing yet?
Yeah, it's nothing.
And now? Still nothing?
Yeah, we can't see your screen. We can see you in the Teams.
Okay. Can you see what's on my screen now?
Yes, we can see the video.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Can you see the new screen? Yeah.
You can see a presentation.
Thank you. So this presentation is, or this project was conducted in 2020, 2021, as part of the DREP postdoctoral program. And my study was titled Reach to Reef Transportation of Plastics in eThekwini, South Africa. So just by way of introduction, as you saw with the video there, that oceans and river stresses include climate change, population growth, and plastic pollution. And this can only be improved through public understanding and the aquatic system and importance of ocean and river literacy. But the challenge is that there is often growing population and urbanization and also socioeconomic disparity that threaten opportunities for people to engage with the rivers and ocean environments, particularly within KwaZulu-Natal. And this was really evidenced by the recent floods that happened, and how it affected people that were really by these riverine ecosystems. So there is really a need to develop strategies to improve societal connections to rivers and the ocean. And this is done by improving and progressing global ocean literacy that has the potential to catalyze the behavior and changes necessary to achieve the sustainable future that we all hope for. So this particular study focused a lot on marine debris. So by way of just definition, marine debris is identified as a significant risk to biodiversity, economies, and also human health. And on a global scale, approximately 8 million tons of plastic is deposited into the ocean every year, and which is estimated to be about 80% of all marine waste is plastic. And this is particularly important because plastic is not only an aesthetic problem where maybe tourism is affected, but also plastic does get to break down into microplastics, which are smaller particles that are now absorbed or available to smaller organisms that can lead to bioaccumulation and biomagnification impacts up the food chain, which can cause all sorts of ailments, when you link metal accumulation and metal contamination, and also organic contamination that gets to be associated with these microplastics. I think another important part of the ocean, and was really identified at the global workshop last year, was that the ocean serves as the largest carbon sink area on the planet. However, the function is being impaired due to plastics and plastic pollution, particularly microplastic pollution that gets to be apparent and abundant in the riverine and also oceans. This picture was taken from Durban Harbour, and this is post floods. As you can see, almost the vast amount of the surface is covered by plastic, and this causes sunlight to not really penetrate into the ocean and hinders the ability of the rivers and ocean to play a role in carbon absorption. So this is another picture taken from a different angle. So the objectives of the study included to use field sampling methodology to measure the distribution and movement of plastic waste near urban centers, along waterways, and also in coastline and in the ocean. And also we sought to understand the consumer-producer relation with plastic pollution, and that was quite interesting. It was quite an interesting outcome that we did not anticipate. So the output of the study was the documentary that we just saw the snippet of, and it's available if anyone is interested. But also we wanted to have a comprehensive data set of plastics on land, along rivers, at the coastal interface, as well as in the ocean, and to see if there is a clear linkage between land-based waste management and also losses into the environment. And obviously the link would be rivers, right? And also we sought to identify opportunities to create alternative livelihoods, if that is a possibility that could come out of the study. keeping the economic crisis in South Africa at the moment in mind. So the methodology was twofold. So we had both a quantitative analysis aspect of it and also a qualitative analysis. With the quantitative analysis, we employed surveys, which were both questionnaires that had about 20 questions on it, and also in-person interviews. And I think just to mention that the study was done when there was relatively strict COVID measures in place. So the questionnaires were mainly through the internet with online, and also interviews, in-person interviews were also through, again, online and interviewing people via the internet. So that also has some effect on our results, I think. And also with the qualitative methodology, we just used transects that were for terrestrial surveys that included inland rivers and also the coastal lines. And for offshore sampling, we used the trawl methodology. And some outcomes of the survey that we conducted, it was quite interesting that about 60% of the general public was aware of the term single-use plastic, and that was just people aged between the young adults, really between ages 20 and 39 years of age. But then when it came to teenagers and the elderlies, 60 plus, it was really less than 31% did report to have know or heard of the term single-use plastic, which gives a good room for awareness and education in that department. And out of the questionnaires that we did dispatch via online dissemination, what we did see was that there were 50 respondents that did, and they were largely in and around Durban, and it was students or it was people who are already interested in environmental management and activists and that kind of thing. So what we found was that 29% of the people, of the respondents rather, did respond to be likely to see litter in the environment on a daily basis. And 20% of those reported to likely to pick it up. And what was really just apparent was 80% of people who did say they're likely to see litter were actually from urban townships rather than the rural areas and your suburbs, if you will. And also what was quite interesting is that our descriptive stats did show that those who were most likely to see litter were also not likely to pick it up, which could be strange, but it's something that was what was expected as well. And I think what was not expected, though, is the response when people were asked, when respondents were asked whether or not they would be happy to see alternatives to plastics, and only 35% responded positively. And I think that was largely due to, again, COVID-19 was really just strict rules and regulations. By then, people were still into single wrapping everything with their plastic, and hygiene took precedence. So it would be interesting to see if we can have another questionnaire if we still get the same result. So out of our questionnaires, again, what we identified about 4 drivers. The first one was the education, that again, there is room for both formal and informal education, such as the education that is happening now through webinars and through social gatherings that don't necessarily require people to have their thinking heads on all the time. And then there was also, cultural connections, as you will see again with some of our results, that there is room there to understand the different cultures, and also engage different cultural connections to be able to understand, to have a sustainable river and also ocean management. The third one was the technological divide that we did see. As I did mention, that the dissemination of the questionnaires was mainly online, and that has resulted in us understanding that, you know, people would want to respond, but then they don't have access to, you know, the data, or they, you know, sometimes people didn't just report to not having understood the question, and they would sort of abandon the question halfway through, the questionnaire halfway through, and that would be because of frustrations that come with, you know, the technological challenge or social divide. Another thing that was a driver that was quite strong that came through is the knowledge exchange between science and policy, as well as the community. So that was like really, there was a lack of interaction in that sector as well. But I think for me, out of all the drivers that we did identify, education came out strongly because, you know, it just came out as the key for achieving the SDGs, particularly in the context of the objective of the goal 14, which is life underwater, and really just looking at, again, formal and informal education, particularly informal education, where you can target both young people and elderly people that we saw that don't necessarily have the knowledge of what single-use plastic is and the impact thereof. So with the qualitative study, what we did was deployed the transect methodology. So we had 2 meter wide transects that were inland, in rivers, and also along the coast, that we did try and track the amount of debris that that were within that identified sort of quadrant. All the data was, you know, now recorded in data sheets that looked like this one. And with offshore sampling, we had 3 transects that were off of Mgeni River, and you know, they were about 27-kilometer long transects each, and then we had about 3 stations within each transect, and a further 3 substations within each station. So quite extensive work was done with that as well. So with the trawls, what we did is we also deployed the CT scan for physical chemical parameters analysis, and also on the flow net, on the trawl net, what we had was a flow meter to really try and understand the flow and the impact of the water waves and the flow. And for the surface trawls, this is the information sheet, or the data sheet that we use to record all the data. And some results, what we did see here is that contrary to what we expected, your rural areas, like your Tuangat farmland, it did not have much debris at all, as you can see on your sort of far right corner, that there is literally almost little to nothing compared to the rest of the findings. Also, your sort of urban areas where there is, you know, frequent cleaning and maintenance and management, there was not a lot of debris that was collected in that area. But your urban townships and urban areas where there's a lot of foot traffic, then you did see that there was a lot of debris, and that comprised predominantly of plastic, and that was hard plastic and soft plastics and styrofoam and all of that. And there was literally no surprises in that. And that also carried through to river data, because with our rivers, what we did see was that, again, there was a lot of plastic, and it was, you know, predominantly hard plastic, followed by soft plastics and straps and styrofoam. However, what was quite interesting and different was the miscellaneous debris, that you do find, and cloth, and that was predominantly in your rural rivers, where it would be probably associated with traditional practices that do happen in those areas. And I think, like I said earlier, there is room to actually engage this and see if there's a way of really addressing it in a amicable way, if you will. Again, the coastal data also did see, again, plastics was really high, relatively high. You had plastics, soft plastics, but what was quite different was that areas or the rivers or oceans or ocean areas or coastal areas that had a lot of maintenance or high maintenance or management did not really just show a lot of litter. Your Umhlanga lighthouse, for instance, we didn't pick up much there. And I think one of the pleasantly surprising ones was the Wilson's Wharf. I'm pretty sure we can't say the same now after the floods, but it was quite impressive that there was little contaminants or plastics in that sector, but predominantly because there was active cleaning, as opposed to your Beachwood and South Beach and all of those beaches that are not as frequently cleaned as the others. And with trawl results, because it was surface trawling, it was not necessarily layered trawling. What we did find predominantly was plastic, because it floats better than any other material. So what we did identify was the different types of plastics that we did find inland, which were hard plastics, soft plastics, polystyrene, and also your fibers or your plastic lines. What was quite interesting is that with the first trawl, all types of plastics were found. We did really identify all types of plastics. And for Matthew, any bycatch was actually returned into the ocean. So we didn't really just impact the environment that much. And also the second trawl, again, there was identification of all the types of plastics. We did have hard plastics, soft plastics, and styrofoam. Not so much of soft plastics, though, with the second trawl. The only difference, or the significant difference, was with the final trawl, where it was just all hard plastics that were identified. So there was no fibers, no styrofoam or anything like that. But I think, personally, I can attribute that to the time of day that we sampled, because that was at night, and it was, the wave conditions were not as calm as they should have been, maybe, or they were earlier on in the day. So I think there's room for error in that one. So some statistical analysis, what we did see was that ANOVA showed no significant difference between all trawls, inland, in river, and also coastal, and into the ocean. In other words, what you find inland is exactly what you find in the ocean, contrary to what was initially believed, that ocean debris is contributed by ships and fishing lines and all of those things. So the inland debris has quite an influence and impact in the marine debris. Also, with the person correlation, what we did see was that there was a direct correlation between the first and second trawl in terms of the amount of debris, and this is not the type of debris, so this is in terms of the amount of debris. However, there was no significant difference. There was no correlation in terms of the amount of debris when you look at other substrates and other habitats, if you will. And I think for me, this would be expected, because plastic is a very light material, for instance, that you cannot really control the flow of plastic. So if it's affected by wind intensity, is affected by the size and the type, how brittle it is, and how the different shapes of how it breaks down and all of that. So it's very difficult to really control or follow the flow of plastic as well. And some findings and recommendation. What we can definitely say is that debris quantity and distribution is not the same amongst the 4 substrates. However, debris composition is definitely the same in all 4 areas, meaning that there is a definite reach to reflow of data from inland through the rivers into the ocean, and the river acting as a conduit of transportation of these this plastic. Again, COVID-19 has heightened people's sensitivity on packaging. So again, it would be interesting to see if following, education and also lessening of, the COVID-19, if people still feel the same way. Innovation from the production side, we did see that it was lacking, but we understand that it could really considerably reduce plastic waste. And also that waste management activities and initiatives should focus mainly on urban townships and urban areas where there's a lot of foot traffic. And some suggestions moving beyond business as usual for sustainable rivers and the ocean. We understand that business as usual is not enough to achieve possible outcome to meet the SDG 14. And what we do recommend is that the programs that we implement should now be youth-centric, so that the youth can also take initiative and also take on ownership of these environments, and also maybe introduction of non-Western centric programs where they sometimes fail because of the foreign aspect of it. And then there should be a focus on single-use plastic, because that is the plastic that you find mostly that it ends up in the environment, and also the focus on digital divide that should be considered, so that when we are conducting studies or communicating findings, or we can't really just rely only on digital formats only. And lastly, there is this disconnect between society, science, and policy can be really merged by platforms such as these, and also other sort of informal engagements that such as workshops and webinars as well. And just would like to thank the sponsors and participants that really just made the progress or the program a success. Just to leave you with a thought, on your left is a picture where you say yes to plastic, and on your right is a picture, so where you say no to plastic, and you can see that 2050 can be looking either, like a pandemic plastic, or we can be looking like a beautiful, healthy climate and environment that we all aspire to have. Thank you.
Thanks, Refilwe, for that. It looks like plastic is the problem for our generation, similar to how lead was a problem for a few generations prior, especially with that new headline, that one that just showed a little bit in your snippet of the documentary, it affecting babies. So yeah, I think that was a recent finding that there was some effect. And then if anybody has any questions, please, you can put your hand up or raise it in the chat box. But Refilwe, I have a question. So, you're saying single-use plastics, and it's something just came to mind, is that there's a lot of single-use plastics in like food packaging. So how are there alternatives to that? Because I know I have seen like alternatives to other types of plastics. Like now you can get like bamboo toothbrushes, and there's a lot of bamboo material, so it's like biodegradable type of thing. So people are looking at different materials instead of just plastic. But at one place that I don't think we have actually seen much of a shift and change is in food packaging. So are there any good ideas on like alternatives for different types of food packaging instead of just single-use plastics?
Yeah, I think that is actually a good question that was posed to some of these producers, if you will. And the one shocking, I think, or maybe just really unexpected response was that there's no drive. There simply is no drive for innovation with food packaging, because people are content to have their single wrapped products and food packages, and they view that as a hygiene, a hygiene reason, or for hygienic reason. But if the community if the people can be now the ones that can really drive the change from bottom up, then we probably will see a difference. But then I think there was no interest and there was no intent from the producers to innovate in that space when we last interviewed them here.
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense. I think it's also the perception of, if it's in, it's clean, and so maybe there needs to be a lot of different ways to tackle that. Is also with just education and changing the mindset of like, to make that happen. No, that's excellent.
Thank you. Another thing was, the example of what's the snout, the straw, that paper straw that everybody hates, that gets to be soggy and nobody really just uses that. And what was said was innovations tend to not be effective or either too expensive, so they rather just steer away from them and stick to plastic, which is what works for them. So I think there is quite a lot of room for innovation in the food packaging space.
I think a lot of people, especially with the straw material, there's been a lot of different things that people have been trying to have like alternatives to plastic straws, but I think we haven't hit that that material where it does the function and people are happy, and it'll be like, okay, this is a good alternative. So we do. But I suppose innovation does take time, and people will eventually, they're working on it because it's something that's in people's consciousness about this. They want an alternative. So I don't see any questions for Refilwe specifically. So I think we can maybe begin our discussion session, and then I'll hand over to Patrick. Patrick, there was a bit of a query. Did you finish your PhD? Because I think I erroneously put you as Mr. Martel instead of Doctor.
Hi, Preshnee. No, I'm still a Mr.
Okay.
So sorry to disappoint you, but the PhD is taking a really long time.
Okay, no problem. I thought that maybe I missed that, and I'm like, because Sean queried, but okay, so I think that's okay. I'll hand over to you now. I see there were some nice questions that popped up, and some nice points that we can expand on, and some nice discussions we can have on like urban agriculture in the floodplains, and how to and dealing with crisis management. So I think I'll leave it to you to facilitate this discussion.
Okay, thanks so much, Preshnee, and also thanks so much to all the presenters. So to just introduce myself, I'm Patrick Martel. I'm from the School of Built Environment and Development Studies, where I'm doing my PhD there. I've also worked on the LERA project, looking at transformative adaptation in the city of Durban, and that has like a DRAP link there. I work a lot with Professor Kathy Sutherland. And then I've also, in like a consulting capacity, I've worked on the Transformative Riverine Management Program in all of the phases, particularly looking at understanding the different river rehabilitation projects or riverine management projects, and focusing on water governance. So that's just a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. So it was great to listen to all three presentations today, by Sean, Matthew, and Refilwe. Just some strong themes to me that kind of just stood out, and what I was just thinking about while you were all presenting was this, a strong theme is connectivity. From like a natural or biophysical perspective, we need to look at things, as upstream, downstream, inland, offshore. So connectivity is really important. Also, connectivity is important from a social perspective, from the academic side of things, and also from the practitioner side of things. We need to connect, our different disciplines, from, like the biophysical to social to economic. Then we also need connectivity between the different social groups, say from the urban poor in informal settlements to high income, from formal areas to informal areas. So this brings about this very strong question: is how do we govern? What actually comes quite strongly through within the kind of the TRMP and just my involvement in it is that there's this strong realization that government can't do everything. We all need to work together. Academics, the municipality, civil society, communities, so just in terms of what also stood out to me was looking at, I suppose, citizen science, whether or not we can get community members or EnviroChamps to use, these different tools available to them. Another strong theme is to look at your various problems from different perspectives, look at things holistically. I've been involved in the TRMP for quite a while, and this was the first time I've heard of, using, say, fish ladders and culverts. And it just kind of shows the value of platforms like this. And also that, particularly for the TRMP, you need spaces for reflection and learning. This is also evident in the Palmerite catchment rehabilitation project in the community of innovation there. Also, this will obviously become highly relevant in the TRMP's external hub, which is probably going to be happening in the future. So learning is really critical. So yeah, that's kind of my little bit that I wanted to just say. So then just in terms of some of the questions that have appeared in the chat, the first one that I'd like to tackle, which I'll actually ask for assistance from Joshua Beer. He didn't present today, but he's actually a master's student who's doing research on food gardens in Quarry Road West Informal Settlement. And there was a question raised by Teresa and then also Indrani about looking at like urban agriculture in floodplain areas. So Joshua, if you could just tell us a little bit about your research, say like 1 minute or 2 minutes, just to kind of answer that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. My project is based in the Quarry Road West Informal Settlement, and it's looking at two aspects. The first is a governance aspect and how different spaces have been set up through their power relations, and how those different relations and conditions have led to the current ecosystem health within those regions. And we're comparing the suburb of Kloof with the Quarry Road Informal Settlement area, and how those two different spaces have been developed to yield their respective ecosystem services. And then the other side is a practical application where we are looking at doing an indigenous nursery and a community garden, market garden establishment, and looking at what kind of business systems and business management needs to go into running this kind of setup, and what kind of different opportunities and what the inhibitions are to these kinds of projects. So we are using an agroecological focus, which is the official focus adopted by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And it's looking at farming with nature, promoting biodiversity, promoting social justice, using recycled and continuous cycles in generating your compost or inputs, and then having localized distributions and celebrating food culture. Yes, that's my project in a nutshell. My personal background has had quite a bit of agriculture involved just growing up, and I've also been involved in setting up an aquaponics farm in Johannesburg, where we looked at using redbreast tilapia and recirculating the water to grow a variety of different vegetables. Yeah.
Thanks, Joshua. I think just also another thing to kind of reiterate is that when you're doing food gardens in these, like in these areas, there's often, the regulations is a bit of a challenge. I know with, say, for example, Durban Green Corridors, they're doing food gardens in riparian zone, or close to riparian zone, and that kind of creates a bit of a problem there in terms of requiring like water use licenses and those type of things. So there's also kind of like legislation that you have to be aware of when doing riverine management. To just go on to, thanks Joshua, by the way, to just go on to the next question that we had in the chat was by Fazile. Sean, I think you're still online, so I think maybe it would be probably best if you could answer this one. How well is the city dealing with crisis management, e.g. red tape, decision-making, communication, restoring confidence, rallying resources? Are we ready for the next crisis? Sean, if you'd like to answer.
Well, there's many different answers to that. I mean, some departments are doing better than others. I think it helps to look at the city. Unfortunately, it's a series of silos, and as much as the city tries to operate as one single integrated unit, the nature of the organization is that there are many different silos, and some are better than others. So very difficult to answer that, beyond saying that in some places you are going to get really good response, in others not so good. In the development planning, environment and management unit, there's been quite a big move to do applications electronically, and a lot of that was pushed by COVID. So there are increasingly the city is going online with applications and communications and stuff like that. There are lots of teething problems, but I would also expect that it'll improve, because these things generally make life easier once the teething problems are over. But yeah, no, I wouldn't say everything's rosy. Definitely not.
Thanks, Sean. Then just shifting to Matthew now. Okay, I know that you've already mentioned, like almost looking at culverts from a different perspective, from a fisheries perspective. Is there any kind of other suggestions that you have that, like how your research could actually contribute to contribute strongly to the TRMP?
Thanks, Sean. Sorry, thanks, Patrick. It's something I've been thinking about a bit, but it's not as clear cut. And if you can define ecosystem services, then I think we'd all be better off. But it's something that so culverts and infrastructure and how we impact our rivers in terms of anthropogenically all negatively impacts fish. I think on occasion we will actually benefit the fish species because we provided for it, but in general the system as itself takes a knock and we lose ecosystem integrity. I think one thing is important is to maintain habitat for fish, and that links to culverts. So culverts are needed to kind of bridge over and connect people across rivers and stuff, but we need to look at how those are designed better so that river connectivity for fish is not hindered. But then we also need to look at habitat provided for fish within the river, so the areas away from culverts and stuff. And I think the TRMP is doing some of that pretty well in terms of alien invasive clearing, even with Refilwe's work addressing the pollution issue, because that's a big thing that alters habitat. And so it's I think where there's been some severe habitat alterations, like the channelization of some of the rivers, and a lot of that is really to to be able to move water through the system quickly, is to maybe relook at how we can't restore some of that habitat as well, and still be able to have the water discharge in a way quick enough so that we don't have this big retention. I think also what's just important is fish have biological life processes. So for eels, they're catadromous and they move from freshwater into the marine environment, or should I say they move from the marine environment into freshwater and back to spawn and die. While others like yellowfish and even the smaller species like tilapia and catfish, they require linkages between certain habitats, but also seasonality. So if you provide, there needs to be a certain quantity of water in the system for them to survive too. So we know during the winter periods, generally we have less water in the system than in the summer periods, and is to actually allow for that fluctuation of water to occur and not restrict or clog the river, so that doesn't happen. And I think the TRMP is addressing that. I think from a management perspective, we may need to respect the 1 in 100-year floodplain a little bit more, and particularly with these last floods, to almost have that as a line along the river course of what you can and can't do beyond that line. So yeah, I think if you allow for those seasonal fluctuations and provide the habitat, the fish species will reoccur and come back and persist.
Thanks, Matthew. Just another question for you, since you've got your mic on. I wanted to just find out a bit about this Amber Barrier Tracker app. Where would one go and get it from?
Yeah, so it's available on Play stores, and it's actually used a lot in Europe. And when you get into it, you'll see how much Europe is using it as a tool to address river connectivity issues in Europe. And it's quite easily transferable here because it just categorizes the barriers that are in place on a stream, and even has a tab for others, so that you can include others that you find. What I think I'll do, Patrick, is I'll add a link to the website on the chat now, and then as well as it's on the Play Store, so and the Apple Store as Barrier Tracker, you'll see it there. And all it does is you go to a site where there's a culvert, you take a picture of it, and then it asks you a couple of questions in terms particularly focused around river connectivity. So what's the height of the barrier? Does it cover the whole width of the barrier? What's the height? Yeah, what does it cover the width of the river? Is there a fish ladder? Isn't there a fish ladder? What is it? A culvert? Is it a weir? Is it a dam? And so on. So it's just a way of really collecting the data to be used. What we did with the Nwazis is actually we just added a bit more because we wanted to evaluate any habitat changes. So if there was an old ford in the river and wasn't being used anymore, we'd log that too. And ford is an option to actually log. I think that's a bad example. I think what we were using was any other old debris or concrete slabbing for some reason that was in there that alters habitat, because that also would alter the fish community structures that should be there. So I'll add. I'm just Googling it now to get it up, but I'll put the link to the website, and then you just look for Barrier Tracker in your app shop.
Cool, great, thank you, Matthew. And then moving on to Refilwe. Obviously, you know, your presentation focused on plastics and finding them in the environment. One of the almost like main themes within the TRMP is looking at like the green economy, circular economy, recycling, reusing these plastics. Like what I wanted to find out is that also with I know there's legislation coming up, I think it's called the extended producer responsibility. I'd just like to get your perspective on that, to see, do you think that will make like a significant change to plastic in our environment? So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think just to start off by saying, personally, I have a problem with recycling, because it's more often than not, what's this now? It encourages a culture of business as usual, and there's almost always this sense that you're doing something better if you recycle, and you can always carry on with your life as you were, and that's not sustainable. We just need a change in behavior. We just need innovation, and also a sort of holistic approach as to how do we then address the issue of plastic that we have, because it's something that we cannot afford to ignore anymore. And in terms of the innovation, I do see, again, my background is in microplastics and toxicity. So when you use plastic to form other things, then my mind sort of goes to then what happens to the microplastics, and how often do you create microplastics, and how is that accounted for when just trying to solve that problem. So I think it's, rather than just saying let's take the plastic and do something else that's going to make us feel better, let us really think of just a more of a sustainable solution that is going to ensure that future generations don't have to deal with the problem. I think Preshnee did allude to, the previous generation had a lead problem and they dealt with it, and now we have a plastic problem. But instead of pushing the problem to the future, we need to deal with it, right? We need to really look, holistically into what really, how we got here and what got us here from early 1950s to 2020, and what is it that can be done to reverse the problem. I think when you say to me recycling is a solution, I just raise a brow to.
Thanks, Refilwe. Just reflecting on my own experiences within interviewing people who are doing river rehabilitation projects, is that just in terms of like recycling, there's even been this like kind of a difference between like where the plastic is actually sourced from, once it's been kind of dumped. Just like some stats that I've come across is that within river systems, so like within the actual catchments, between 90 to 95% of the plastic in rivers, is recyclable. Whereas when it gets also to like almost the coastline, or like say in the harbour, it's very low percentage of it is recyclable. So that's also just another dimension to this, like kind of discussion. And then I suppose we're coming quite close to the end of our time, but I'd just like to ask Sean, how do you think that, or how would you like UKZN's research to add to the TRMP?
Well, I think one of the values of DRAC is that it's has a lot of research across a lot of different fields, and we see Matt here with 2 presentations by Matthew and Refilwe, but there's a hell of a lot more that's being done, and I think DRAC can become a coordinating hub for this. And there was quite a lot of work by research assistants towards the end of last year to pull the different research pieces together, and what we found we have is that these various different sort of research projects collectively produces a body of knowledge that becomes very useful. And there's a lot of it useful in the TRMP context. So as we sort of move forward and start implementing in the TRMP, we'll have to, we look to DRAP and the academics within DRAP and the students within DRAP to start answering those questions. And we very much have started developing research programs, the questions for research programs that we can bring the academics in. We just got to find some money. We've put in some funding proposals, so hopefully we're successful with those. Thanks, Patrick.
Great, thanks, Sean. Preshnee, I think we've come to the end of our discussion time because I see we've got 1 minute left of our meeting. But yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone for participating, and for those of you who've stayed on the call for, until 4 p.m. on a Friday, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for that, Patrick. I think with that we'll close up. Yeah, I think this meeting time is not as productive as we'd like it to be. So maybe for the next ones we'll try to get it a little bit earlier. Yeah, and then maybe like earlier in the week and earlier in the day so that we can get people staying on. So to close, I'd just like to thank everybody for participating and for staying on. So thank you to the presenters, to Sean, Matthew, and Refilwe for giving us some nice presentations on some of the work. And I certainly learned like one thing from each presentation that I didn't actually realize before. So yeah, so it's good. So I hope everybody else at least took away something and gained something from this experience. And then I'd also like to, thank you to Patrick for facilitating, just to getting some more conversation around these research areas going. And then a special thank you to Janice Mudley from Mile for the logistic support of getting this all together, and for the technical support as well. And thanks to Colin Pillay for the logistic support, for the networking support to help us expand this event to other institutions. So we did send out invites because it would be nice to get other institutions and other perspectives. There is research that is happening in other institutions besides UKZN that might be relevant, and it's nice that we reach out and we try and make these connections. So with that, I think we can close. Smiso, if you have any closing thoughts, anything further to add?
Preshnee, thank you so much. No, there's none on my side besides thanking everyone who participated, and surely in the next 3 months, not next 3 months, depending on the planning team, we'll have another invite. Surely we'll need to discuss with that team which topic we'll be focusing on. There's so much that needs to be covered. I know that we've already engaged with our water and sanitation guys. Maybe it will be them presenting together with the pollution research group, or maybe we can go into details on how the city responded to the latest floods, trying to get the perspective of disaster. So there's so many things that we'll try to uncover during this webinar series. Besides that, thank you so much, guys. We'll keep in touch, and maybe we'll develop some sort of a small report just to touch base on what was covered today. Thank you so much, and you become part of our network. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Smiso. This session was also recorded, so I'm hoping to get the recording and put it onto the UKZN YouTube channel, and then we can distribute that link widely, because I did see a lot of people had to leave early, and I think it was a bit of an awkward time for many people. So at least in that way, they'll be able to see the presentations, hear the discussions, and still, be a part of it, or see what has happened, and didn't really miss out too much. So thanks, everybody, and with that, we will close this session, and we will hopefully see you again for our future webinars. As Smiso said, we have some good ideas coming up, and if you have any ideas where you feel like the discussion would of it would fit this platform, please let me know, and then we can maybe add it in and sort of tie all these things together. Thank you so much. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Cheers, folks. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Preshnee. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.